I was humiliated right in the police station. They laughed at me, disrespected me, spat in my face, because they decided that I was a nobody. But just half an hour later, their world turned upside down. Because the one they thought was a simple black woman from the street turned out to be their new boss. And I came not just to lead. I came to break the system from the inside. We all believe that treating people fairly gives us a chance for something better. But at the Bakersville Police Department, that was not the case. I knew that when I arrived here. Everyone knew I was not just a woman in a new police uniform. I was black, and that in itself called into question my ability to make a difference in this place. My name is Celia Jameson. I was the first black woman to be chief of police in a small town where most of the police officers were middle-class white. I was unlucky. I was immediately thrown into what has been dubbed the old system. And, I confess, I realized that it would be very difficult to change it. I did not come here to become their friend. I came here to make each of these people hear my words, see my actions, and understand that I am not afraid of change. And I knew that in order to do that, I would have to go through a lot, through their neglect, their trials, and even their humiliation. It was hot that morning, even though it was early in the morning. When I got out of the car, I left it in the parking lot where police officers usually park. None of them were surprised that I decided to come like this, without the usual presentations. They didn't even notice me at first. I was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, no insignia, nothing that could give me away. I wanted to see them, not through the prism of formal meetings, not through their usual police record, but simply as a person, to find out who they really are when they don't have to wear masks. I entered the building and immediately got into the atmosphere of this place. From the lobby to the corridors of the police station, I could hear the voices of officers, laughter, and the sound of tapping on the keyboard. Everything was as usual, except for the smell of stale coffee and the lack of respectful appearance. I had no intention of discussing it with any of them until I saw one white police officer start looking at me curiously. I was not surprised when he came closer. He was tall, wearing armor, but with a fake self-confidence that was evident in his posture. His badge said he was Officer Timothy Miller. "What are you doing here? This isn't the place for someone like you," he said with a mocking smile as he approached me. The other officers in the corner had already started laughing, waiting for a pound of flesh with the new face who had accidentally entered their kingdom. "I'm sorry, I don't understand," I replied, calmly looking back at the faces that had already begun to show support. "You don't understand? Well, you must not be from our world," he laughed even louder. I felt my pulse speed up. I knew that they were trying to humiliate me now, and I was not going to stay silent. But before I could respond, he did something that left me speechless. He spat in my face. My heart froze, and everything around me became quiet. At first I couldn't understand what had happened. Had it really happened? I was outraged, but I knew I couldn't show weakness. I stood there for a few seconds, giving them time to realize what had happened. The whole room was silent. I took a napkin from my pocket and wiped my skin, holding my head high. Officer Miller stood in front of me, his eyes burning not with anger, but with indifference. "I think you should explain what you're doing here, not just treating strangers like this," I told him calmly, even though it was a struggle with myself. Meanwhile, the door opened and a senior officer, Captain Johnson, came out. He saw the situation and didn't say a word. He just looked at me and realized that I was ready for any consequences. And that was just the beginning. Captain Johnson stood in the doorway, watching Officer Miller, standing a few steps away, clenching his fists tensely. I could feel his body radiating nervous energy, but it didn't matter. I was outraged that I had just been humiliated, but the sense of duty that I now had did not leave me. The captain approached us carefully, commenting quietly on the situation so as not to raise a fuss. Miller seemed to be waiting for some kind of support or apology from him, but Johnson did not. He just looked at me, and after a few seconds of silence, he said, "Celia, this is not your fight. Are you okay?" I just nodded my head, although a storm was raging inside me. I wiped away the tears that were in my eyes, trying not to show it. Now there were two forces in my heart, anger and hope. From what I can see, there will be no more room for this kind of behavior. Johnson continued, turning to Miller, and this was the first real acknowledgement that the situation would not go unchallenged. "Do you realize that this is unacceptable, Miller?" The feeling of tension was unbearable. I could see him shrugging his shoulders, trying to find an excuse for his behavior. But this moment was not about making excuses. This was a moment of justice that I was not going to let go. I took a step forward, keeping my eyes on Miller. There is no excuse for what happened. You didn't just do this to me. You humiliated the very essence of our profession. The captain turned to me and looked at me with an expression that was both understanding and determined. I mean, you are very stubborn, Celia. And that's right, because you're at the head of this shift. But remember, not everyone is ready to change yet. I took on this burden. Every word I said was important. I was not new to the profession. I had been working for more than 10 years. But now everything had changed. My place here was in question, and I knew that I would have to go through serious tests. My mission was not only to change this city, but also to change the people who work in it. After this incident, I felt the air become heavier. I found my place in this room. I didn't just come to manage. I came to build a new reality for all of us. That same day, I gathered all the officers in a large meeting room. I stood in front of them, looking at their faces, each expressing different feelings. In some looks I saw misunderstanding, in others anger. And here I was, a woman whom they probably considered a temporary figure, someone who could not frighten them, standing before them, knowing that every step I took now would determine the future. I was not going to talk about the past or explain my purpose. It was obvious. I started like this. Today I am not here to be a friend or a leader who will give you the freedom to do what you want. I am here to make you change. Silence filled the room. I continued. This was my first job, and I've seen a lot of things, but what happened today cannot be left untouched. My words were clear to each of them. Everyone knew that I was not here to forgive them. I was not giving them a chance to avoid responsibility. Miller sat in the corner, his gaze stubborn, but I knew he understood that this would not end until he saw real change. Miller, I said, turning my gaze to him. Now you have time to think about whether you want to be part of this change, and if you're willing to pay the price. With every word I said, the room became more and more difficult to breathe. It was a real test for each of us, and I was ready for it. The next few days passed in a silence that seemed oppressive. Every step, every glance in the corridors of the department was full of tension. I felt the atmosphere change. At first, I thought it would be just a temporary effect, but in the first week it became clear that something more was changing. It wasn't a quick process, but the changes were starting to be felt. When I walked into the conference room for the next meeting, the atmosphere was different. No one was laughing. No one was making jokes behind each other's backs. The officers sat quietly, listening intently as I talked about the basics of ethics, the need to respect every person we meet along the way, and why each of us should be an example to the community. My message was clear and direct. We are not just the police. We are part of this community. And if we cannot behave in accordance with the high standards we set for others, then we have no right to wear this badge, I said, standing on the podium. But if you're ready to change, I will be with you. With every word I said, I could feel the taut nerves of some of the officers begin to loosen. I could see some of them bowing their heads, as if they were starting to think. Not all of them were open to change, but I knew that if at least one of them started to understand, it would not be in vain. But the main challenge ahead was waiting for me in the person of Miller. I could not ignore it. Every day, his eyes were filled with aggression, but over time, this aggression began to fade, turning into fear. Right after our last meeting, he came into my office, slowly at first, but then almost with a smile. I want to talk, boss, he said. It was the first thing he said to me without disdain or sarcasm. What do you want to talk about, Miller? I replied, looking at him, not intending to give up easily. I was ready for this moment, ready to make him accept the consequences of his actions. I realized that it wasn't good. And I'm scared that I'll need to change myself, he swallowed hard, silently admitting that he was broken. It was strange to hear. I couldn't tell if he was truly sorry or just looking for a way out, but it was important to me that he at least admitted his guilt. Miller, I know this is hard for you. I've been there too, learning to be part of a system that was against me, but that's why I'm here, to change it. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but the fact that he showed up in my office with this conversation meant that something had started to change. After that meeting, the atmosphere in the department changed, although not as quickly as I would have liked. The officers started to treat me with more respect. It was a small achievement, but it was in these small steps that I saw the future. There were no moments when I could relax, but that was good. I felt I was going in the right direction. However, new challenges awaited me. One of the most visible police officers, Officer Thompson, began to openly disrespect my orders. He constantly expressed distrust of my decisions and meetings, and it became obvious to everyone. He was someone who never wanted to change, but I couldn't let him get away with it. I was ready to act. Thompson openly contradicted me during an operational meeting, and when I asked him about his behavior, he just threw it away. Why should I listen to you? You just got here. If you were in my position, you would realize that all these changes are just empty words. These words resounded in me like thunder. I realized that this was not only a fight against the system, but a fight for everyone who was not ready to give up their prejudices. Thompson, you no longer work under me, I said, not giving him a chance to convince me of anything. You have no right to work here until you prove that you are ready to change. When I made my decision about Thompson, the room fell silent. I could feel every officer in the room listening to my words, their eyes involuntarily moving to me, but none of them dared to say a word. Everyone knew I was serious. This moment was not only a challenge to Thompson, it was a signal to everyone in the department. I was ready to act, even if it meant losing some of them. Thompson stood in front of me, his face scrunched up with anger and hostility, but there was more than just anger in his eyes. It was panic. Panic at the realization that I was really in charge of this department and not afraid to use my authority. He opened his mouth, but I interrupted him. There is nothing to discuss. You either work according to my rules or you leave. As soon as you realize that a team is not just a collection of individuals, but a common goal, you will come back. He was angry, his fists clenched, but he walked out of the room without saying a word. It was a difficult moment, but I knew that moments like this were necessary. It was only by continuing to set the rules and not compromising with those who were not ready for change that I could maintain respect and authority. It didn't mean that the changes happened overnight, but it was a start from which we could not go back. A few days later, I received the report from the internal investigation into Miller's activities. I knew that this was a crucial moment, for him, for the department, and for me. I sat at my desk in my office, rereading the report, and every word, every fact, confirmed my doubts. Miller was not just incompetent, he was actually one of the most toxic elements in the department. His history was long and full of complaints. It wasn't just disrespect for people, it was systemic hatred hidden under the mask of the law. We scheduled a hearing where Miller was to appear before an internal commission. That morning, I went to the hall, and the atmosphere was heavy. I could feel everyone in the room watching my every move. Miller was sitting on the other side of the table, not meeting my eyes. He had long since realized that his career in the police force was likely to be over. Miller, we know everything about your actions in this department. All the complaints, all the incidents. Today you have the opportunity to tell us why it was not important for you to change, why you did not respect not only me, but also others who were trying to make this system better. I spoke calmly, but my words sounded weighted and serious. Miller looked up. His eyes were full of anger, but also despair. He was trying to justify himself again, but his words had no power. I had heard this in his previous explanations. He hadn't changed, and so he could no longer be part of this team. Miller, your future with the police ends today. Immediately after the hearing, you will be fired. We will not tolerate this behavior any longer. I announced the final decision. Everyone present listened intently, and although some of them did not look impressed, they could see that I was giving them no choice. I had destroyed their illusion of impunity. I acted decisively, not with gloating, but with a sense that I was doing the right thing for the department and for the community. Meanwhile, my leadership began to influence the atmosphere in the department itself. Most of the officers began to openly support my decisions, even if it meant changing their habits or reconsidering their approaches. One by one, they began to realize that each of us has a responsibility to the others, even when it seems difficult. I especially noticed changes among the junior officers. They started asking questions. They came to me for advice, asked how they could change their behavior and attitude towards people. It was the beginning of something new. And although I knew the road ahead would not be easy, I felt that I had finally taken the first step towards building a police team that could be respected. What struck me most, however, was when one of the new officers, Lisa, came up to me and admitted that her view of the police had changed since I became chief. She said, I didn't think change was possible. I saw how people like Miller had always been at the top, and I thought that's the way it should be. But now I see that things can change. These words gave me strength. I couldn't stop. I knew the next steps had to be done right. Meanwhile, the changes in the department were gaining momentum. I could feel the atmosphere changing. At first, it was just small steps. Junior officers began to ask openly about working methods. Senior officers were more reserved, trying to adapt to the new realities. But even with all these changes, I knew that the struggle had only just begun. The hardest part was yet to come. The last obstacle was a meeting of the Personnel Committee, where the results of the unit's work over the past few months were discussed. Several senior officers still could not accept that I was their boss. It was not only a matter of my race or gender, but also the fact that I was simply a stranger to the system. They thought that they could outsmart me, that I would eventually back down, as I had done with so many others. They didn't take into account one thing. I was already ready for it. I was not afraid of conflicts. At this meeting, I noticed one of the senior officers, Sergeant Bradley, sitting in the corner with his arms crossed. His gaze was heavy and focused. I knew he wasn't one of those who would change so easily. He was the one who had been behind that old system even before I was appointed, and I knew this would be the final test. During the meeting, Bradley raised his hand, and although I already knew what he was going to say, I gave him the opportunity to speak. His voice sounded sharp, and his words were full of complaint. This is not a place for experiments. You did not come here to break everything that was built before. The changes you are trying to introduce will only destroy the efficiency of our department. We were working well before you got here. Every word Bradley said was a test. The room went quiet and all eyes turned to me. I couldn't let him get away with this. I looked up. My eyes were hard, but there was no anger in them. I was calm, but determined. Sergeant Bradley, do you think the old methods really worked? Do you think the system is fair to everyone? Because I know that many of those you consider effective are more likely to be disrespectful of people than to fulfill their duties. I'm not here to break everything. I'm here to restore justice, to ensure that we as law enforcement are an example to the community. I noticed Bradley's expression change. He didn't respond. Perhaps he was beginning to realize that change was inevitable. He didn't agree with what I was saying, but I saw a glimmer of doubt in his eyes. And that was important. After that meeting, I continued to work, preparing the department for new challenges. I was ready to defend my position, not to back down, and to prove that change is possible. And they were beginning to bear fruit. A month later, I received a letter from one of the city's residents who had previously criticized the police. He wrote, "I didn't believe that change was possible, but after you became chief, I see that the department is working better. We can trust you. And I am no longer afraid to go to the police." These words were my greatest achievement. It was not just recognition of my work, it was confirmation that I had chosen this path for a reason. It was the result of the fact that we, as a team, managed to change ourselves and start serving our community. Miller filed a lawsuit after he was fired, but justice was on my side. I did not allow the system to cover up such actions. It was an important moment, when the law became more important than personal interests. And it was only the beginning. My work was not easy, and there were still many difficult decisions and checks ahead. But with each new day, I felt that we, as a police force, were getting closer to those who support us. My mission was not only to show that change was possible, but also to build trust with those we were supposed to protect. I stood in the lobby of the police station, looking at every officer who passed by. They were not just colleagues, they were my allies in the fight for a better future. I knew that there was still a lot to do, but this fight was worth every step because I could see the changes already beginning to be felt. And I was ready to go further.